everyone. Hello. Happy Friday. So it is with great pleasure that I'm welcoming you this evening to the British Library for the Bocas Literature Festival. So the Bocas Lit Fest is here. That deserves a round of applause. So it's an evening tonight of stories, poetry, and conversations as the Caribbean's leading literature festival returns to the British Library with some of the finest writers and poets from the region and the UK. Bocas Lit Fest came in 2022, and there was a glorious day. I'm sure there were many of you here who were probably at this day in October 2022, and it was grand. It was grand, it was grand. So my name is Nicole Rochelle Moore, and I'm the British Library's curator for its Caribbean collections. And I also want to extend a really warm welcome to those who are joining us online. We trust that you'll enjoy the evening. We'll be taking questions from people in-house and also online. If you're watching online, please submit your questions to the question box below the video. And for in-house audience, we will just, raise your hand and someone will come to you with a mic. So just a couple more housekeeping points from me. For our live audience, please do turn off your mobile phones. I'll put them on silent. We are not expecting any fire alarms this evening, so if you hear one, please follow the emergency exit signs. It will not be a drill, it'll be the real deal. This evening is divided into two panel conversations with a short interval between each. The first is how memories become poems, where poets reflect on the places, incidents, and relationships at the heart of their recent books. And in the second session, Echoes in the Blood, the panel will explore how the tensions that shape individuals and societies produce complicated ideas about the region, about the Caribbean. It is my pleasure to introduce our chair for our first session, Fawzia Muradali Kane. Fawzia is an architect and poet from Trinidad and Tobago, now based in London, and is the director of KMK Architects. Her debut poetry collection, Tanti Jab, I was going to say La Jablesse, but is it La Jablesse? It is, but I'm not saying the la, and it's confused me there. Tanti La Jablesse, long listed for the OCM Bocas Prize for Poetry. Her poem, Eric, written in Trini Creole, won the second prize in the 2024 National Poetry Competition. And her second collection, Guaracara, will be published by Carcanet Press in 2025. So welcome, Fawzia Muradali Kane.
Well, we meant to have done a sound check, but just let me know if you can't hear, or raise your hands at the back, or jingle your jewels, as it said. So I'll just tell you briefly what the format will be. We have a countdown clock here that sort of raises our blood pressure a bit, because we're already 10 minutes late. So I'll have to add, I presume, 10 minutes onto that thing. My maths isn't very good. I'll start with the introductions, and then we'll have the readings. Panel discussion with questions, short readings after, and then the Q&A open at the end. The introductions, basically the biography. This is Christine Roseeta Walker. Amazing, is a Jamaican poet and novelist living in Manchester, England. She graduated from the University of Manchester with a master's degree in creative writing. She's the author of the debut poetry collection, Coco Island, that we have here. Amazing. Her writing is deeply rooted in her Jamaican heritage, drawing inspiration from its culture, people, and landscape. Despite spending most of her adult life outside Jamaica, her muse remains the Jamaica of the 1990s, and she describes writing about that period as an acceptance of absence. And I want you to hold that thought, because that's a theme that will come in here also in how we speak. Her poetry has gained recognition in esteemed publications, PN Review, Wild Court, The Tangerine. I could say the whole long list here, but you could imagine after reading that, you could see that. And her poetry will appear this autumn in the Manhattan Review. Lawrence Scott, and we have three various types of poets also with other lives that inform their work, as you will find out, is a prize-winning novelist, short story writer from Trinidad and Tobago who taught literature for many years in London and Trinidad. He's published his first collection of poems this year. Would you believe it's just his first of poems? In July 2024. He was awarded a Commonwealth Writers' Prize in 1998 and a Lifetime Literary Award in 2012 by the National Library of Trinidad and Tobago for his significant contribution to the literature of Trinidad and Tobago. He's an elected Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and was made an Honorary Doctor of Letters by the University of the West Indies. And you could read more in the biography in the book, and he's also got a website that you could read more about that. Okay. Anthony Joseph, again, his biography. I would read this, and sorry, I forgot my reading glasses to tell you the age. His most recent collection, Sonnets for Albert, which is here, this is was awarded the T.S. Eliot Prize and the OCM Bocas Prize for Poetry and was shortlisted for the Forward Prize. A poet, musician, and academic, he has published several poetry collections, 9 albums, and 3 novels. And I have to say, in the office, I play your work because his music is like the love child of Gil Scott-Heron, and I've got, I was going to say Mahalia Jackson.
Oh, no.
But I think it's more Sarah Vaughan. That's just me, right? Listen to it, you know. So first of all, we will have the readings, and Anthony will start. Before we do that, I just want to say what my impressions of the work is. Coco Island, for me, it's like, because the synesthesia, I don't know if it's the architect way, where we have to do all the different creative arts merged together, but it's like, to me, it's like running in rain that's warm, a sudden downpour, and then suddenly, just as suddenly it stops, sun comes out, and the world looks fresh and bright. You'll understand what I mean. And Lawrence, it's like, yes, he refers to the watercolors of Cazabon in this, but it is also as if you're looking at watercolors and words, the way it's applied, and it's not light as in weight, but it's light as in that thing shining in our eyes at the moment. It's iridescent, the poem in it. And Anthony, well, you know Anthony, he is earth. Anthony is red clay, it's wet, and yet it transforms into something when you have fire attached to it. And it's also like sorry to do the architecture term, but it's carpentry. It's like cutting into wet cedar, you know, when the scent and the texture comes with you. So that's how these books are to me. So,
Okay.
Anthony, you could start off now.
Yeah. So, hello. I have a new collection that's just come out last week, actually, which is Selected Poems, which collects 30 years of writing. My first collection came out in '94. So I'm going to read a piece that started off as a poem and then ended up being something I did with my band. We recorded it on an album. The last album actually came out a couple of years ago. And now it's back in a book as a poem. It's called Language. And the epigram is by Amiri Baraka, who says, "To name something is to wait for it in a place you think it will pass." Language. Something about how we have names for everything now. How each leaf has its place at the shaded side of the river. The dark dirt under the cocoa onion has a name for that kind of soil. The soft cup of scales forming the echeveria has a name. The way it folds, the filament in the light of the firefly, the wick, the tail, has a name. Luciferin in the production of light, water in the knee, and it has a name, meniscus, effusion, which is really a form of liquid textology, dividing the meat into chunk and gill. Once, there were still unseen places and things, corners of experience which had no name. And so you could walk upon them and meet them solid for the first time, be dub-wise and dread, and hail them up and bump Locke's head, dread. And my grandmother said that if the flying frog leapt and landed on your face or the soft fold of your arm, that it would stay there. Attach itself with glue, and you would have to iron or steam steel, impress upon the frog back skin till it stick to the stainless heat, until it release and peel off. We returned from country visits, from visiting kin or churches hid in bush, to find flying frogs perched in corners of the house. Trapped in their silence of peace, I never saw their leap, but I seen what hurricanes could do to islands. I seen it on TV, and it had a name. Negro Palatimus, Hylidae, Rhacophorus, fringe-limbed or marvelous, Ecneomylia, polypodates in the calabash tree, which has a name. My cousin Alvin and the hillside where bananas are grown from seed. This place has a dance, and it has a name. Even vinegar has a seed. We were wild children. We had names with which we moved through space like blades. Thanks. I'll just read one more, actually. A short one. This was originally from a book called Rubber Orchestras, and there's a lot of poems from that. I think most of the poems in the collection, in the selected, come from that book. My editor really liked that book. I don't know why. This is called Red Dragon Band. In 1930, Decca hit New York with the half-tone calypso, and Creole ballets were thrown to evil men in Harlem. The best orchestra was the Red Dragon Band from Hell Yard. They emancipated the biscuit drum, the break drum, the spoon. They were overheard at the Village Vanguard in Carnegie Hall, flung against the uproar of empire and rhyme. Red Dragon Band in this conquered land put riot in the teat and in the Antilles, with grace and dance like masquerade bands. Dry River Devil is the contra dance, the real Red Dragon Band was a dong-tong ting. Stickmen hid the chorus under tarpaulin. Thank you.
I forgot to mention this collated edition was only launched less than a week ago.
Yeah.
It's very, very fresh off the thing, so I hope they have it in the book. And next we have Christine.
I'm going to have to put my glasses on for this one.
I know the feeling.
Unfortunately. So before I put my glasses on, the poem I'm going to read is Bible and Key. And this poem illustrates the sort of the juxtaposition between religion and voodooism that exists in Jamaica. And in Jamaica, when somebody loses money and there is an accused, they have a method of proving someone's innocence or guilt by trying Bible and Key. And this poem is an illustration of that. Bible and Key. That day was the worst. Can you remember who took the money? I said it wasn't me. You said you didn't find it falling out anywhere. Your brother said it wasn't them. We looked everywhere. Pearl began turning over the pages of the Bible. Psalm 23, the door key with the stem placed in the middle of the psalm. She began tying up the book, the steel bow sticking out. Can you remember? She said she needed 2 witnesses to help balance the Bible and key on their fingers. Then X stepped forward and held out his index. Can you remember hearing the words, by St. Peter? Can you remember how the Bible began to turn when they got to by St. Paul and said your brother's name? You running home, calling for your mother. We all know the true and living God never lies. Your brother wouldn't run. He said it wasn't him. X got upset and said your brother was guilty. X was on his way to the station when your mother, on the back of a bike, passed him on her way to the opium man. When your mother returned, she told the police who had your brother kneeling on his shirt. The thief was a light-skinned man with a crooked index. The police said the all-seeing opium man knew his psalms. We glanced at X, and the police seized him and marched him over to his bathhouse, the blue tarpaulin structure, before leading him beside the still barrel waters, the one place where everyone had forgotten to look. Thank you. So I'll read another one. The 3 poems I've chosen to read tonight, they're sort of based, religious based. This one is someone thinking of the afterlife and what their choice is. The Tadpole's Pond. With a quart bottle of oil, a rolled tissue for a wick, you walk through the field, shading the flame from the breeze. You can hear the preacher's voice over the hill, calling all sinners to come to the pond where the tadpoles swim. From the top of the hill, you see a long white tent sparkling, and hear the preacher singing, all wrongdoers come on down to the pond where the tadpoles swim, and forsake the old you, your old ways, till your burdens grow light. You blow out the lesser lamp and run to the bigger glow, till you reach the tent, sinners kneeling on their knees. The preacher rests his hand on your pendant head and tells you to be free of all evil, free your mind and heart from all principalities. You wait at the side and watch the saint speaking in new tongues, jerking and ticking. One comes to you carrying a tadpole in a clear jar. She whispers, what would you gain if Christ comes tonight and you are here left behind? She gives you the jar and tells you to follow the sinners down into the pond. But you are scared now, holding your jar, watching your tadpole swim, observing the sinners getting in the pond and wading up to their waists. They free their tadpoles, their tails fanning next to legs, kicking back into the past. They are creating a new them, but you know that you could never return to that life to be born again. You turn to leave as the new saints crawl from the lake into a new life, afraid to expose the sin festering on your legs. You watch to see their changed forms, knowing your last way to life is through those waters.
Now we'll have Lawrence, who will stand for us. Sorry, back to front.
I'm going to stand by breathing. Okay? I'm going to stand for the reading.
Apologies, Lawrence, you were supposed to be second.
Looking for Cazabon began its life when I was writing and researching my novel Light Falling on Bamboo, based on the life and times of Michel Jean Cazabon, Trinidad's most famous painter. This one is on the road with Cazabon. It's in his consciousness. They're all sonnets, so they're quite short, at 5 minutes.
Yes.
What did they call it? An impression? An etude? What was the word? Impressionism? He put that out of his mind. Just paint, boy. Listen to Louise. She had his interests at heart. Whap! Get the acid and gum Arabic ready. Michel Jean worked, forgetting where he was, as in each painting he reclaimed his home. Olivia, so I come back, always like I just come back, he said to himself, as he speckled the bushes, croton hues. He captured the balata tree in the foreground, the razor grass, gree palms, cashew tree, and the young cedar, then the taller bois-cano and the gommier, the silk cotton in the deep of the forest. The book sort of moves around. Cazabon painted on the west coast, mostly, and in Port of Spain of Trinidad, and then up the islands. But this is mainly his Trinidad output. But they're not literally about the paintings. They're more me traveling around Trinidad. I was in Trinidad for 3 years, immersed in his paintings and immersed in Trinidad. Discovery Bay, down Cedros. Tied in. Now that Colon has come and gone, we are left with history books, and this time, when driftwood is caught with a tangled seine in the snare of the mangrove and clogged slime. At Fullerton, the fishing boats creak. No fish! The mooring ropes, taut as whips, trap our feet. My friend tries to hook his carite, but his catfish and crow to throw back. As the lone fisherman, meditative at the end of the jetty, casts his lines, frigates and pelicans soar above. See what we don't see. Bodies, floating crimes, among the plastic bottle detergents, polystyrene foam cups, dragged by the currents. East Coast Manzanilla. Cazabon wouldn't have got to the East Coast. The forest was too impenetrable. The road is like old time through cocoa shade. Once I've left Sangre Grande's slow traffic, cocoa pods, purple, yellow lanterns fade. Villages crowd in with soca music, till I hit Manzanilla's churned brown surf. The green interior of Nariva Swamp, Nariva River, the long Cocal surge, Braddock's Point, and the brown Ortois' slow slip. These are those mileposts on the heart's journey, the beat of the ocean, beat of the heart. Pujas prayed, garland the waves, while jandis, fluttering from bamboo poles, erase the hurt. With these and all other prayers, I have counted the murdered, those murdered, still more murdered. Okay, this is up the coast. Cazabon wouldn't have got up this coast either, but a lot of Trinidadians do, and tourists. Called Tongues. In the swell, pirogues pull at the taut moorings as tight as quattro strings. You have your heart torn by the old music in the names of this coast. Las Cuevas, Maracas, La Fillette, Blanchisseurs, the Spanish, the French, in a patois made by Africa. Despite prohibitions, child, don't speak Congo. An old-fashioned East Indian family, a grandmother on the shore in her shiny dress with her grandchildren, speaks a tongue made from Bhojpuri, coming over the Kalapani, black water from Calcutta, Uttar Pradesh, the cane fields of Saint Madeleine, Pitimon, the sugarcane estate where I was born.
Thank you. Just before we go on to the panel discussion, because I think in RAL and science about watercolor, the chromatic, what blue is this?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Is it close to cobalt?
No. No, it's closer to peacock blue, but it's sort of halfway between peacock, a mix between peacock and cobalt. I don't know why, but it's the sort of deep sea in the distance on a really blue sky day with a cloudless day. That's what it got to me.
I confess something to you.
What?
Sometimes I think my colors and my forestry in the poems are not really my knowledge, but they come from Derek Walcott's poems.
Cheat. Cheat. Oh, that's well. The question. Speaking of that,
Might just throw that in.
thank you. You just threw me off anyway. Right. So the questions we have. What I thought I'd do is take a bit that I got from while reading the poet's work and then formulate a question of that. Now, I know the theme of this is a memory of how, says the blurb, how a specific memory then transforms into something universal. But we are all readers of poetry, and we know that's basically what a poem does. So we're going to mine that a little deeper, find new colors and depths into those thoughts. So what struck me first of all, the first questions is with Lawrence, with landscape, because Lawrence has, in the epigraph, one of the epigraphs, a quote from Wilson Harris. And I would advise you, please, do some deep reading of the preface too, because that's also beautiful writing. The landscape possessed a life, because the landscape for me is like an open book, and the alphabet with one word was all around me. Okay. Lawrence, I'll start with you. Okay. You stated that landscape in your writing was almost a living character in your preface. And could you expand on that? How did your process incorporate this living character for this book?
Right. Well, I'm a prose writer, really. 5 novels, 2 collections of short stories, And if you look at the second epigraph, it's from Walcott.
Yeah.
Where Walcott says in his long autobiographical poem, Another Life, he hopes that these 2 disciplines might cohere and something like that.
I hoped that both disciplines might be painful accretion, cohere, by painful accretion, cohere, and finally ignite.
Right. And he's talking about his painting and his poetry. And the book is dedicated to my partner, Jenny, but it's also remembering Derek Walcott and that particular bit of Walcott, which is that he is a painter. And he is trying to, his poetry actually is very painterly in many ways. And a lot of people have remarked, and I think it's there, about my prose. It's very descriptive and very painterly, particularly in the book Light Falling on Bamboo, which I was having to learn what it was to paint. And I'm not an artist, I'm not trained as an artist or anything like that. So as a character, it had to function more than just background, more than just a description to fill in space. it had to kind of live, right? And
That's key.
and
Right.
it does so in poetry, but I think I've always wanted it to do that in prose as well.
Oh, that's
And people might say sometimes, you know, people often say, I loved your book, it's so poetic. And I always think, oh God, that's a rel put down, you know. They're not going to read a story, you know. But I want my story to be carried by that prose.
Yeah.
And then I get a chance to write poetry. So I want the two disciplines to help each other. Yeah.
That's why I tried to avoid the word painterly for describing your poems, although that was really the thing that popped in my
But
head.
that's fine.
That's why I said they're like watercolors, because the effect of looking at a watercolor, which actually leaves gaps where the paper shines through as that. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you for asking
Yes.
me.
And Christine,
Yeah.
right? Now, Coco Island is also populated with strong characters, mostly women.
Yeah.
Mostly women, not all, but all of them are anti-stereotypical. All of them. We have like the grandmother who isn't the kind, sweet, generous, supportive one. It's like bitter, and no explanation, which I like also. No explanation of why, because you always have to give where you have a negative character, some sort of trauma, but nothing. I like that because it leaves gaps for us to come through.
Yeah.
And landscape also features here. Do you feel the landscape of these memories are a support act or also a main character for these? What do you think?
I think I would say they were a support act, but reading the poems again, it does come across as the landscape is character. And the reason for that is because Jamaica is where I grew up, and the outdoors was a big part of my life. And I think it's what shaped my imagination and my creative mind as well. So it's almost impossible to separate the two, to not sort of find inspiration from the landscape.
Was where you grew up, was it coastal or
Yeah,
interior?
coastal.
Ah, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of the texture of sand and
Yeah.
salt in a lot of your poems with that, with Coco Island. I presume you'll be reading Coco Island for us later on?
No.
Oh. Okay, you're probably tired of reading it then. No,
No, I've not read it yet.
Okay,
I'm saving
okay.
it.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Anthony, much of the landscapes referred in your poems are sensual, right? You have the food, pudding, and Congo pepper. We say scorpion now, don't we? Now, like it's souse, which you could write down all these ones that I'm doing. Fishing and ravines, fruit picked warm from the vines is the phrase you have. That's Birdhead, Second Avenue. What other kinds of landscape do you create to, and I use this word carefully, to hammock your poems?
Well, I have a interesting, life in that I was born and raised in Trinidad, but I've lived here longer than I lived in Trinidad. So I have the two sort of landscapes. I'm really fascinated by what I call the transposition of space, where places here remind me of Trinidad, or at a first glance they look like somewhere in Trinidad. So that's one thing. So that's something that I play with, the sort of the shifting amorphous idea of landscape. The landscape is really going on here. It's not really out there. It's in your brain. It's how you perceive it.
Mental landscape.
The landscape isn't doing nothing. You're doing everything. You're like, having memories or having associations with the place.
Yeah.
But the landscape isn't actually doing anything. So that's one thing. And I think, growing up in Trinidad, for me, anyone that's been to Trinidad or from Trinidad knows it. I always say it's a place where everything happens at once. There's no sort of linear narrative in Trinidad. It feels like everything is happening at the same time. And it's something that Lovelace talks about as well and tries to articulate in his fiction too. And I think some of that is part of what I do, is understanding that landscape is just another character in the story. Not in a very, the Western writers always say that, but as a Caribbean writer, you're dealing with the way landscape affects character as well. So it's all integrated. It's not just a static thing. It's like the landscape is part of the psychology of the place and psychology of the people as well. So yeah, I think that's how I deal with it, as a sort of a living, breathing entity, where everything is sort of happening at the same time. Where there's, in Trinidad, there's like, the sun is hot, you're smelling something, somebody's talking to you, you hear somebody's passing in a taxi playing loud music, you catch that. It's like everything happens.
Yeah.
It's a chaos of senses, So yeah, I try to articulate that in the way the prose or the poetry kind of tumbles and falls upon on itself.
So you're creating a landscape for us, the readers, there, from
Yeah.
the mental one, that's the chaos that's there.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. And the next thing that we want to move on is Christine's point of life here, because we're sitting here and we're saying that half our lives was spent away from the place in our minds as home. And I remember talking to some of my school friends up here, and they're talking about their heartbreaks when they were teenagers in their 20s, and they're crying their eyes out. And even though we've gone through these things as we get older with experience, it dulls it. And there's a particular poignancy and pain that you still feel. The memory of that pain at that age is still there. So I'm coming to Christine's point about the acceptance of an absence with the writing. And all of you, the three of you, would have that as a separate, have that, but also different, same but different. Christine, we were assuming that writing is a cathartic process. But what else during your writing was revealed while you were writing these poems? And also, how did the adult talk to that child when I was talking about the pain that child had? We still feel that child in us sometimes when we remember.
Yeah. I think for me is the realization that most of the people I knew when I was a child are no longer there. And that there's no way of going back and to actually experience what I've missed out on because it's gone. So I've tried to use poetry to sort of, to almost preserve that experience that I've had with those people. And I woke up once and I literally felt almost this overwhelming feeling of lost, that I've lost all those people. I've lost my culture, the things that I love doing, and this was my sort of attempt to preserve some of it.
So it's a form of grief
Yeah.
crystallized. It's interesting. That's and we get that in the poems because it is frozen for us. It's preserved for us all. Because there's so much that's familiar for us in our upbringing in the Caribbean that when we read your poems, even though this is Jamaica and it's 1,000 miles plus away from Trinidad, it's there. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I really think you should read it, and you'll get that evocative feeling too. And Anthony, how did this acceptance of absence, and it doesn't necessarily mean the place, I'm talking about people, for example, because Sonnets for Albert is about a mostly absent father. And there's that trope. It's a trope about the missing father. We have that sort of made-up scandal about that poster in Vauxhall, where it turned out actually that the father was next to the mother in the thing. It was, anyway, there's...
I don't know.
There's a wedding picture of a mixed-race couple, and the black father is missing from it. Living that. But in this one, he appears and reappears. He's there, but he's not there. And how did that affect your writing? I know I said how did that affect, but how did your writing, and I'm not saying how did you deal with it as if it's therapy. How did that transmute, that absence, while you were writing and at the end of it?
Well, I mean, there is that book was an attempt to sort of it was an attempt to do two things, and I think all of my work has been trying to do two things. That you're trying to, on one level, act as a kind of historian for your people, because the Caribbean life is not one that we're that familiar with. People outside of the Caribbean, people that live and write in the West, are not that familiar with the lives of Caribbean people, on an intimate sort of biographical level. And I think part of the responsibility as a Caribbean writer is to sort of render these things in history, to sort of see, talk about them or put them into a book, into literature, So there's that. I think George Lamming used to talk about that part of our role is to be the historian, is to be the keeper of secrets, the keeper of the traditions, as a writer, because no one else is going to do it for us. There's that. But also at the same time, since we were talking about Walcott, I remember listening to an interview with Walcott where he was talking about Omarus.
Yeah.
And someone was saying, oh, you've created a Caribbean version of Omarus. And he said, no, I haven't. What I've done is shown that there are epic things in the Caribbean, as well. And I think that's what I do. I think that's how I deal with the loss, is to make characters like my father take on epic proportions, like my grandparents or whatever, take on these epic forms, which are sort of valid in Western literature as well as Caribbean literature, so that they become international, they become sort of archetypes,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I try to do. Those are the two things I think that I'm working with.
That's
Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does, because
Yes.
because it's also an ignorance on what our history is and what we are as a people collectively. And I think, reading, look at social media during the Olympics, and the rest of the world is amazed at how all the islands, okay, just like a family, you bicker in private and you close ranks in public. They were just amazed at how all the islands celebrated when somebody from one island won something. And that's really so we are there creating our own future. We're young in terms of the way the youth develops in our countries, and we are holding the agency of how we create our future. Nobody is going to tell us what to do about that. We are what we are, and you take it or leave it. And we will be what we will be, and you take that or leave it. Thank you. Sorry, I hope that's recorded because I can't remember what I just said. Now, Lawrence, there's a different type of absence now. Cazabon spent time away from his family, and the first poem he read when he referred to Louise and Wop. Louise is his wife back in France, and Wop was the nickname of his son.
Yeah.
Okay. 2,000 years ago, and we still call it a Wop, so it's just amazing. And you also had to be separated, that parallel, while you were researching that book. And I honestly think, make sure you buy Light Falling on Bamboo as those two parallel books, because they go together like twins, fraternal twins. You had to be separated sometimes from your partner, Jenny, during your research from some time, quite some time. How did that tension of longing affect what you wrote, or some of the things you're writing, and what are the examples where you address that in your book?
It's easier said in the poems,
Yes, so if you want to tell us,
you what it is.
read bits of it if you want.
Could I read this one poem then? Mm-hmm. I'll sit down for this one as it's part of the chat.
Yeah.
The Indian laburnum hangs its lanterns out into the afternoon sun, a drizzle falling gently through the pui and palms, dry season mixed with the coming rains. The scorched earth yields the green, while wounds weep from the serrated hills, and in the skies dark thunderheads become cumuli safaris. Cloud caravans roll out over the Gulf to the islands, Craig, Caledonia, Rock, and Lenigan, and one pelican for the pelicans, which soar and swoop. All this in an afternoon, while I wait for your call to startle me with a voice at once familiar and new. Yeah. So You know, Cazabon had to wait at least 2 weeks for the packet to arrive. I think it came from Paris and then to Falmouth, and then, you know, and that's how the post was delivered. And there were letters, and there are letters in my novel, which I'm sure were inspired by what I was experiencing in being away from my partner. We don't have children, but yeah, it was like enough. And there are other poems which, talk about that.
I don't have children either. The words will have to be the legacy for the future. But
well, I mean, what I mean by that is, if these poems, they were written, you know, I was writing my novel, and when I look at my notebooks now, I can actually hardly read some of these poems, in fact. And then, you know, it took quite a while for me to get hold of them, arrange them in this way, take them to Mimi Calvati, who read them when I thought she was going to send me back to the drawing board. She said, you know, you must try and get them published. And she did help me as well. So they were not like, I'm not writing a collection. I wasn't writing a collection at the time. They were completely random. And therefore the ones that are about that loss, about that absence, they're there because I'm literally experiencing that at the time. It's not a memory, you know. It's like there
so
and then.
Immediate.
You know, it's
you get that.
Yeah,
you get that
and I'm writing them then. I mean, I've learned a lot about these poems since they've been published, actually, and reading them to myself and reading them aloud. Yeah. I don't know whether that answers your question.
It does. I would advise you to read the preface in Looking for Cazabon, because it actually speaks a bit about the writing process too, which is always interesting to inform. But I like to read a poem first before finding out about the process, so that you read it fresh, and what you get from it, you know, is also fresh. The last question we have is the same one for all of you now. It's not going to be things that... Now, Christine, coming back to that, in her poem, Coco Island, the first one, she ends with the line, towards the end, it's not the actual end, this is the law of paradise, something taken for something given. Because as it is where the tourist comes, and then somebody goes on a boat and the sea takes them. We're not all paradise with that. But it made me think of this. Imagine the devil is preventing you entering your paradise, not the paradise, but your paradise you really want to go in. And you could only enter if you give up the most precious thing to you as a writer, in your writing, or as a writer. What would you give up? I'm going to start. Okay.
Can you ask the question again?
Okay. What is the most precious thing that you could give up in order to enter your paradise? And the devil's standing there with big jab, covered in flames, blue flames, propane, you know, oil country. So, yes. So who wants to go for... Okay, Christine, shall I?
Yeah. I'll give up my pen and keep my computer.
Well, the devil will say you're cheating a little bit, but he'll sneak you in. And Anthony.
I think I'll give a more sort of academic answer to that.
Okay.
Well, not really academic, but, you know, I think, for me, you know, I think growing up in Trinidad and then coming here when I was like a young adult kind of freed me, or meant that I didn't have the burden of being burdened by this this need to write sort of identity poetry about being black, poetry about being black, poetry about, you know, I think which a lot of, black British writers have, you know. A lot of black writers, full stop, were sort of burdened by this sort of expectation to always articulate blackness or articulate,
Be angry or a saint or
Yeah.
a victim. Yeah.
And because I grew up in Trinidad, grew up in a very sort of eclectic, quite surreal upbringing and all that, I was kind of free from that, and I was able to really, when I came here, I was able to experiment with anything I wanted to. Surrealism and language poetry, and really get into poetry without the burden of identity politics. The identity politics did come back into the writing, though, because living here,
Yeah.
eventually you're going to face it, so it came back. But I don't know if that's something I would give up, but maybe.
You're going to be there with the devil in front of you all the rest of your...
Yeah.
You're not going to go in.
Maybe
right.
I'm thinking of the opposite. Maybe I'm thinking of what I wouldn't give up. Sorry.
Okay, right. So you would like hell then?
Yeah, I think I'll have to. I think that's it.
Yeah. That's like the estate agent who,
Man.
saw hell and wanted to go down because he saw everybody enjoying themselves. And then you asked the devil why, and he said, that's his show flat. So, and what would you give up?
What would I give up? I would give up religion.
So that's good.
Is that precious to you?
Well, you know my past. I don't usually use it in my autobiographies. I came to England to be a monk.
Oh,
Right.
so it is a
So,
it is a precious.
devils and all that religious way you've couched the question.
Yeah.
I need you to strip it down because it doesn't terrify me anymore. I came down, right? And I have my paradise. But that I've given up. The idea that the Caribbean is a paradise never was a paradise.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said
so-
your paradise.
But I've already given it up. And I have what is paradisial about Trinidad as well as what is not paradisial about Trinidad.
But just out of curiosity, which order were you interested in?
I was a Benedictine monk.
Monk. Right, okay.
I don't know why I didn't stay at Mount St. Benedict. I was educated there and everything.
Well,
I think actually with hindsight, I just wanted to get the hell out of there for a while.
It's our
And
game.
do something about all the religion I was given.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's our gain with that. And now we
There are gains with what?
with that you left, that you decided not to become a monk.
Massive gains.
And now we have short readings, and then we'll have a Q&A session. We'll start with Christine, then Lawrence, and then Anthony.
Okay. I think Lawrence will like this poem then, since you're giving up religion.
I'm very religious in some ways still.
He hasn't given up faith.
Okay.
He's given up religion.
Yeah. So this poem is called Lady Owl, and the name for owl in Jamaica is Patu.
It's what, sorry?
Patu. Yeah.
Jumbly bird
And if you do it in Patois, it's Patuk. Yeah. Lady Owl. She remained the Patu in the pear tree, across the wire fence, in the pasture lands, at the back of our house. She was hooting again, calling out late at night, Lady Owl, our nocturnal priestess, would visit once a year, dressed in white turban and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She would mutter as she scratched lines on the kitchen floor, clearing the house by lamplight of evil spirits, duppies, and demons. She was our Patu aunt, Lady Alga, with the deep round eyes, great for spotting lizards, spiders, and the supernatural. She said she had the gift of sight, the ability to see at an angle no one else could. To prove her point, she would spin herself twice round in her loose frock, wheeling her body with her arms pinned tight at her sides. As children, we would wake to find her marching through our bedroom, carrying the Home Sweet Home lamp and hooting the name of the person she said would die in a fortnight. The next day, the dogs would begin their ritual digging in the flower beds, while drank crows circled above the chosen house. When 2 weeks passed and the funeral did come, we children learned to mark her words. On her last visit, she rushed through the hall in her long flowing dress, growling and raising her arms, tapping on the low-bowed ceiling. Her brother's name was on her lips. Coolie man, she said. She had seen his name in the book of life, that he had come to her bedside that night and roused her from her midnight dream. Our father, eyes still heavy with sleep, took her by the hand and told her their brother had died the year before, that she had predicted the sea would take him almost a year to that night. But she hooted, "Coolie man," through clenched teeth until we all went back to sleep. When daylight came, our lady owl had disappeared, leaving her headscarf behind like a shroud, airing on the bamboo chair. Thank you.
And Lawrence?
I'm going to stand again. I'm going to go to the end of the collection, which is like going up the islands. Cazabon painted up the islands. This was my editor, Polly Patello at Papillot Press. In her father's, Dr. Rhys Williams's house in Roseau, Cork and Queen Mary Street corner, ghosts stand at the window. Beyond rusty roofs, Morns like iguanas climb into the blue. He climbs the steep stairs, his hand upon the pitch pine banister. He clasps Jean's wrist, and he is here to register his allegiance, holding where she held on. Fingers within fingers that hold a pen, turn an ocean's engine into waves and plunge a green sun into Sargasso. Make it orange with a sunset whose rays fire the air, a torn lace veil as she retells Jane Eyre. Burns the empire to the ground with this light that lights the room with words she learns to write. As well as all the paintings and so on, they're all the poets, I had to kind of surround myself with for this book. And this is from, this is my epigraphs of poets and after poets and so on. This is after Pour fêter une enfance, to celebrate a childhood by St. John Peirce, the Guadeloupean poet, French poet, who got the Nobel Prize in 1960. So you have Walcott in St. Lucia, you have St. John Peirce in Guadeloupe, and you have Aimé Césaire in Martinique, and Jean Rhys, who I've just read about, in Dominica. Pretty rich kind of force that you are living between. Words are a world. Hers, muslin for dresses, linen for sheets and shirts, cotton for bodices in broderie anglaise. He wears a pith hat with a wet rim of sweat, carries a switch, reins in hand, arms the color of a mule, his khaki sprinkled with ash, his horse Prudence. She dips her comb in a glass of water, running it through her hair, curling light, a hummingbird's hover, a halo. She smells of l'herbe Madame Lally, yellow-white lily flower on a green lawn, collected by a black woman with breasts of ginger. Bayram on a hanky, she pats the fevered brow of a white child. I just finished this. Mimi Calvert, he said the collection was well concluded with this poem. So if I went over time, just maybe a second or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been cute.
And this is the Martinican poem, Martinican jazz. After Mali and at the end of small hours, Aimé Césaire returned to my native the Cahiers. Mimi says it's good to end with a song. It's a kind of a song, I suppose. The moon's bright lip kisses the humming night. Its radiance illuminates the sea, a path to the end of darkness to light up our love and bring you to me. While down on the bay a jazz singer sings of sorrow and losing his woman, his tune on the air is a lover whistling. A saxophone moans its own lamentation, where the sound of the waves on the rocks is the tide pulling at the weed below, where the bright fishes glide and a keel knocks hard against the jetty. I sway and go down to the sands, pause, pick up the tune of love and loss as the singer joins Marley's anthem, no woman, no cry. I look for the moon in your face in this night's jazz lullaby. Thank you.
Anthony.
Okay, so I was talking, just briefly mentioning this idea of Trinidad and the Caribbean and the effect of everything happening at once. And this poem kind of is an attempt to sort of articulate that in a bit clearer way. This is called On the Move. It was raining like a verb, like bone. It was July, hard road, maybe Marseille, up the mountain, acrobatic. It was skin, it was hid, it was back home, it was written, Port of Spain, we walked along, heavy light, copper septic, heavy rain. What was that? That was thunder, wind that blew us out of sync, scenic time. It was odd, a kind of shrimp, Caribbean. It was pulled back to reveal it. It was London, we were sailing, we kept on it. It was midnight, we were moving, Purple River, insect bone. It was a lie, no it wasn't, it was the truth. Maybe more like a long con, like love as an anchor pulls us under. It was repeated like a chant, like a hymn, like a dirge, like a bell. It was gravel, rugged pitch, a blow that left her, wound in water, wild fever, fever grass. It was patchouli, orange blossom. It was something like madness. It was painted with desire, Baptist heat, so elastic, glossolalia, spirit talking. Once, when freedom had meaning, like organs of heat in the evening, my body held vibrations of the Caribbean, and we let bled that excess negritude of being. But the past didn't last long. It grew tired, and we wept in forests where black myth was painted in that acrobatic silence. And now my soul still holds the aroma of anguish. Do not gaze, not too long, upon the past. It's so dissonant, bass notes, sky church, steady dying. We were waiting to burst out of human life into brightness, heading east to the ocean, too shallow to drown in, rugged steep. We were coming back from drowning, Manzanilla, old plantation. History was all around us. It was fluid, rhythm motion, on the move. So shallow is this memory that it pierced me like Chiwakahuan arrowhead, drowned it in double-beaten goatskin drums from gust and plywood junctions, where bliss throat sparkles there, like sea silt in jettyfish near Port Authority, where cruise ships landed to this dreamscape, contemplating the road. Our verge of memory split with Cain like Canboulay in a place where everything happens at once.
Q&A now. We have the Q&A now.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, that's okay. But that's what, sorry, where's Lawrence? That's it. I'm sorry, we won't have time because we started a bit late, so we won't have time for the Q&A. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening to us. And I'll just finish with a line from Christine's Limbo, which has an implication, obviously, being Trini, but it's forget, dance on the shadows of the past, make our dead proud. And that's what we all need to do. Thank you.
My name is Nicholas Laughlin. I'm the Festival and Program Director of the Bocas Lit Fest in Trinidad. Very happy to be here this evening. And I will tell you a little bit about the festival, but before I do that, I want to introduce someone else. I would like to ask to come up on stage Sue Hollick, trustee of the Hollick Family Foundation, who are our main partner and sponsor here this evening, making this evening possible. Sue, please welcome her so she can share a few words with you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. And good evening, everybody. What a fantastic evening it is so far, and I know it's going to carry on in the same vein. I think that it's absolutely thrilling to welcome such a talented group of prize-winning writers to London. Congratulations to all our writers. Not only are you all award winners, but together you represent some of the very best of contemporary Caribbean writing. Thank you for sharing your work and your ideas with us this evening. It's wonderful to be part of this blossoming of a new era of Caribbean literature. The Hollick Family Foundation is proud to be one of the founding sponsors of Bocas Lit Fest. We've been investors for nearly 15 years now, and we've watched Bocas grow from strength to strength to become the Caribbean's leading literature festival. Through hard work and inspirational leadership, Bocas has enabled Caribbean writers to find their voice at home and now more often internationally. Caribbean literature is here to stay across the world. Congratulations to Bocas for everything you've achieved. We look forward to continuing to invest in your successes for the next 15 years. We're in it for the long haul, and I do hope that other funders will consider joining us as well. I promise you it's very worthwhile. Good luck to everybody for the tour and for the future. The Spanish-speaking world deserves to hear your wonderful stories, and I hope everybody enjoys Madrid that's going there. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the next part of the evening.
Thank you very much, Sue. And as the writers come up on stage, just very quickly, as Nicole Rachel said at the beginning, this is the second time the Bocas Lit Fest has been at the British Library. We were here 2 years ago, and we're very thrilled, delighted. We're back here again. Thank you to all of our friends at the British Library, to the Hollick Family Foundation, also to the Eccles Institute, which is part of the British Library, who are also supporting this evening's event. I think probably most of you in the audience, the fact that you're here means you know a little bit about the Bocas Lit Fest and what we are. Next year will be our 15th year, our 15th festival. We are based in, yes, I see some hands kind of going up in the audience, right? We are based in Trinidad and Tobago, but very much think of ourselves as a Caribbean festival with a very specific Caribbean focus. But that also automatically makes us a global festival because Caribbean writers are everywhere, writing about everything and everywhere else. Our writers are unstoppable and insatiable. And as Sue just hinted, this event tonight is just the first one in a small tour that we've just started. We will be in Madrid next week, Tuesday. We will be in Belfast next Thursday at the Belfast International Arts Festival. And if all goes well, and let me see if I can catch the eye of Jonah here at the British Library. If all goes well, maybe we'll be back next year, the year after. I think this won't be our last time here at the British Library. I just want to say that I'm just one of the Bocas team here tonight, and I just want to say that, of course, I'm very happy to have with me here Marina Solandi Brown, who is the founder of the Bocas Lit Fest, current president of our board. Also here is Lucy Hanna, who is one of the directors of the Bocas Lit Fest, and my colleague Shivani Ramlochan, who's part of the programming team at the festival and an amazing poet herself. And the last person or people I want to say thank you to, that's of course New Beacon Books handling the book sales outside, because none of this matters if you don't read the books, right? So we need publishers to publish the books, we need booksellers to sell them, and we need you to buy them. So we're glad that New Beacon is here selling the books tonight, and I hope that none of you will leave tonight without a book tucked under your arm. The last thing for me to tell you is, we haven't even announced this publicly as yet, so I'm kind of giving you some secret information. We think that our festival dates next year will be the 1st to the 4th of May in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, our 15th festival. If you want to keep up with what we're doing and you don't already know where to find us, bocaslitfest.com, Bocas Litfest on social media, join our mailing list. It is a very active mailing list. You'll be bombarded with wonderful information about everything we're doing. Right, so you've heard enough from me. You really came here to hear the writers. I was supposed to introduce the chair of the session, but he's told me he's a man who needs no introduction, or at least he'll do his own introduction. So Colin, Grant, please welcome them. Let's get started.
Yes, I am Colin Grant, and why are you all here is what I'm thinking. No, really, why are you here? Why are you not at home? You're here because you don't want to have a singular experience at home. You're here because there's community here. I was 7 years an altar boy. The first thing I want you to do is to turn to your partner, to your right and your left, and say, peace be with you. So, to continue the, and peace be with you all, and peace be with you. To continue the religious theme, many of the things I'm going to say tonight come from the books that I've been reading today. When I was thinking about coming to the stage, I wanted to come to the stage with a bowl of water, because I wanted to wash the feet of all of these great writers, because they are deserving of that kind of respect. And that's the kind of respect I feel for them. I'm not going to give you a long bio of all of them. I'm just going to say their titles, actually. So we have Monique Roffey, who's going to read from Passion Tide. Safia Sinclair is going to read from How to Say Babylon. And Kevin Gerard Hussein is going to read from Hungry Ghosts. Now, they've all won many, many awards and prizes, but I think the most important thing to say about all of that is that they each are recipients of the Colin Grant Prize for some of the best books I've read all year.
Does that come with cash?
Well, I'm pleased to say I have at least 200 notes in my back pocket, so yeah, I'll be happy to free myself of some of it by the end of the evening. So I should say also that we have true Trinidadians sandwiching a Jamaican, and I am I just came up with this idea today. Actually, I'm an associate Jamaican because my parents are Jamaican, but I'm born here, and if you hear me mispronounce or say things that don't quite sound right, that's because I have a kind of Jamaican, Luton, home counties patois. But let's think about the Caribbean voice. There's the Caribbean voice in terms of the cast of your books. But can we all begin to think about what is the Caribbean voice? I mean, there was a program that started 80 years ago on the BBC called Caribbean Voices. What would you say is the Caribbean voice today? Let's have an attempt at answering that. What's your sense of the Caribbean voice, Monique?
Well, some Caribbean people sound just like me.
Yeah.
I think it's very, given that half of our writers, maybe more, are living in diaspora, and as Anthony says, he's spent more time here, I think people code switch, are capable of code switching a lot in our work, and depending on who we're hanging out with, I can hear myself code switch sometimes from standard English to non-standard English.
And you do that in your work?
I do that in my work, for sure, yeah. And I do that in Trinidad. I hear other people in Trinidad code switching. I hear people speaking up and down the continuum of Trinidadian when I'm in Trinidad all the time. I mean, it's not I mean, there is this kind of standard West Indian, and we do have a Trinidadian dictionary. It's a massive thing, and I've got a copy, but I don't use it much. And but I think it's a mix, and also I know that the Anglophone islands, we all speak very differently. We can't be confused. But I'm over to Sophia.
Yeah, has your writing Caribbean voice changed from leaving Jamaica and arriving in the USA?
No. I think it's even become more heightened, the way that I want to represent the Jamaican voice. And I agree with Monique that there isn't one Caribbean voice. And I think that's the beauty of the Caribbean, is that we have so many different rhythms and musics and cultures that come together. But for me as a Jamaican, I try to, in my work, think about the land of Jamaica, our culture, our history, our folklore, as something that can be mirrored on the page, specifically the way that I'm constructing the lines of poems or sentences. I think of the landscape of Jamaica as like a fertile mirror to how lushly I want the sentences to read, how, I kind of want the reader to feel like they're knee-deep in the land of Jamaica when they read my work, to feel a humid kiss of the air of Jamaica, to hear our musics, our rhythms, our different dialects, and to think about the way that we construct stories in Jamaica, this sort of folkloric tradition, also in the Caribbean, which I find to be a matrilineal one, right? Like my mother and my aunties and the women in my family are the ones who pass the stories down to me. And now I feel very much like, okay, now they've passed these stories to me, what am I gonna do with them? And so the way that I'm constructing my work is also paying attention to this folkloric tradition, which I think it was Anthony who said it. It's not linear in the Caribbean. It's all happening at once. It's circular, and that's what I think of when I want to approach the page.
Thank you. So, Kevin, let me be a little bit Jamaican, stroke Trinidadian, be a bit pecan. So, is that right? Did I say that right? And I'm just thinking about your title. So, Kevin's title is The Hungry Ghosts, but it's also Preta.
Yeah, Preta, yeah.
So why do you not call it Preta? Why do you call it Hungry Ghosts?
I didn't call it that. You have to ask Bloomsbury.
Oh, really? So
but I like the title because it's a term that was used during my grandmother's funeral. I didn't really know the term before, and I think the hungry in it, because all the way in Trinidad, hungry for something. And so when they suggested the title, I really loved it, like especially the hungry part of it.
And just so we understand very precisely and very quickly, what does the title denote? What is a hungry ghost?
A hungry ghost, if you were to visualize it, so it's a mythological figure primarily in Hinduism and Buddhism, and it's a small creature with a very, very small mouth, but with a large belly. Long, thin, slender neck with a ravenous appetite, but nothing really to sate that appetite.
And Sophia, how to say Babylon? How do you say Babylon? Babylon?
You're really highlighting the associate Jamaican.
I should say that I was taught by a process of ritualistic humiliation. So I can't really be humiliated. I try to humiliate myself is the real plan. But no, seriously, in terms of the title, how did you arrive at the title, How to Say Babylon?
Well, for the Rastafari, like Babylon holds, this very important place, right? So for the Rastafari, as you know, Babylon represents anything that they see as oppressive or down-oppressive to the Rasta man, to his family, anything connected to colonialism, imperialism, slavery, you know, anything that they see as sinful or you know, temptation, anything they see as ruinous, they call Babylon. And the way I grew up, Babylon then came to mean anything outside of the gate of our house, then came to mean anything outside of the door. And then it came to mean anything I thought that was not of my father's opinion. And then eventually it came to mean me. And so the title is really pointing to all the different ways I learned how to say Babylon and what it meant to me through the different moments of my life.
And it came to be more prominent, didn't it, after several Rastas, many male Rastas were brutalized, beaten, killed in the 60s.
Yes. I mean, the Rastafari, I think something that many people might not know, because when a lot of people outside of Jamaica think of Jamaica, they think Rastafari is sort of the definitive cultural linchpin of Jamaica. But the Rastas are historically a persecuted minority in Jamaica. They are 1% or less of the Jamaican population. And when the Rastafari movement began, I mean, they were hounded by the government. They were outcasts in Jamaica. They were turned away from their families, forbidden from having jobs. Their children weren't allowed to go to school. They were forbidden from walking along the beach sides that were being developed for tourists. And in the 60s, we had a prime minister who said, "Bring me all Rastas, dead or alive." And he sent the army to round up all the Rastas in Jamaica, brought them to jail.
Was that Bustamante?
That was Bustamante.
Ras.
Yeah. And he, you know, I wrote about this in the book, yeah.
Well about it.
And so at the time, the police force even did target practice with pictures of Rasta brethren. And so, yes, so then Babylon really in Jamaica became synonymous with the government, with the army, with the police. Yeah. So even now in Jamaican patois, when we say Babylon, we mean police. When we say Babylon down the road, that means police down the road.
There's a few Babylon in your book, aren't there, Monique?
Yeah.
A few bad boy Babylon. Tell us about the title, Passion Tide, that relates to Easter.
Yeah, so this Passion Tide, the book wasn't initially Passion Tide. It went through a couple of other titles to begin with. So it's based on a true story, and this young woman was found murdered on Ash Wednesday. So my initial title was Ash Wednesday, and that was the title for a while, and everyone was like, no, no, no. And I had another sort of Christian religious title, and then it's a protest novel, and the action ramps up, but it gets, Christ suffered for these 2 weeks. It's about the passion of Christ. And so that is the kind of psychological, spiritual background of the last 2 weeks of what happens in my book, when the women are basically coming together, again, being vilified, being, rounded up.
And we should say they come together because the book opens with a murder.
With a murder, yeah. And so Passion Tide the last 2 weeks. And my editor actually, I think he texted me, emailed me, said, it's called Passion Tide. And I said, oh, no, it's not. I was just like, it can't be that. And he sort of thought it would be Passion Tide. I was like, no. And then about 2 days later, I was like, yeah, that is the title. It's the title, yeah. It has a lot of, I like the word passion, title.
Absolutely. So we're going to have some short readings, and you're going to kick off with a reading from Passion Tide.
All right. As you probably heard, I'm a little bit, I'm not that well, so I'll see how far I get.
Yeah, sure. I won't help you with my Jamaican patois.
Okay, so, what did you say?
They laughed, it doesn't matter. So long as they laugh, it's good.
Okay.
They're laughing at me, by the way. Not
okay. So we're in the middle of the book, and there's been some protesting. These women get together, and they think they're only really going to last a night, maybe two. And one night, there's this old idea of courage calling to courage around protest. And one night becomes two, becomes three, becomes a week. And then people join them who normally wouldn't join. Steel band, pan-sides join them, all kinds of people join in.
Should be pointed out, this book is not about Trinidad, but it bears striking resemblances to Trinidad.
Well, all of us, I think a lot of us fiction writers are
Don't
kind
look
of
at me.
cutting Trinidad out.
Sure.
But yeah, it's not set, well, it is set in a Caribbean island, a bit like Trinidad. In fact, I mean, don't get me started about Me Too and Trinidad. We could maybe talk about that later. So at some point, there is a big camp and there are women protesting and occupying part of the city centre. And I'm just going to read from there, from what might happen, what happens at some point. And so on the fourth Sunday of Lent, thousands of women, their children left behind in the creche, marched back to the cannonball tree where the young pan player from Japan had been murdered, strangled by a stranger and left for dead. Women who were black and brown and African and Carib and Hindu and Creole, old and young and queer and straight, many from working class backgrounds, but not all. Some held large photos of dead or missing local women. Many held placards and a new hashtag, various signs, I'm scared too, femicide must stop. In these numbers, they were now impossible to ignore, always a symbol of the cannonball tree held aloft. The women were trailed by TV cameras and photographers. Women filmed themselves on their phones. Tara Facebooked the event, streaming it live as they marched. By the time they reached the tree, many onlookers had joined their ranks. Sunday, always a day to celebrate mothers, grandmothers, a family affair, the skies blue like Maljo eye, earth parched, Sahara dust in the air, the women's souls soared. The tree was bound and choked up with dead and wilting bouquets and deflated helium balloons. Okay, bellowed Tara through her megaphone. She gazed at the crowd, a sea of women, almost none she recognized. Here, finally, were her soldiers, the army she'd only been able to conjure in her dreams. Charlene was by her side, and so was Gigi, and Axel, and Fleur, and Satine Ladouce, her original comrades. Let us lie down in protest. Sisters, let us lie down, let us die together in protest. Let us speak truth to power and demonstrate that this killing of women can go on no longer. It is unacceptable. A rumble of yes. Do I need to read out the statistics? State the plain facts, how many of us already know them? A murmur went up. No, no, we do not need reports to tell us what we already know. 1 in 3 of us is beaten in the home. Another murmur of support. Sisters, let us lie down in protest. The mayor is gone, but we want our 7 demands met, right? A roar, yes. And then women began to lie down, one by one, on the parched ground. Thousands of women laying down, eyes closed as if dead, a quiet hush. Tara watched as Fleur and Satine and a handful of their collective moved as one with buckets of red dye, not blood this time, zigzagging the red across the prone bodies of women who were fed up, who weren't taking any more of women going missing and turning up dead all the time. The vast scene gave Tara the creeps. It looked like a war had happened, a massacre, a grand-scale femicide. Thousands of women faking death on the savannah. The photographers and camera crew went into overdrive. Now we might get somewhere, whispered Tara to herself, before she and Gigi and Charlene hit the ground, lying dead as if they too had been murdered. And as she gazed upwards into the tree's tall arms, Tara had a sense of déjà vu. This dying had in some way already happened. Had there not already been a massacre of women over time, over millennia, thousands of women killed because of their sex? Yes, she and others had been here before, femicide and unknowable death toll. Also, she sensed the hydraulic pull of the tree's internal root systems, roots to branches, water pulled upwards via the trunk. That was how all trees lived, bottom to top. The crown then flourished. Roots, trunk, branches, tree, earth, sky. Laws existed in the natural world. The Four Noble Truths also existed. There is pain, and pain is caused by craving. And then it came to her, that feeling of being here before. She'd seen it before. Yes, how? She saw it then, a blurred vision, a knowing somewhere which lay in wait, her own passing, death by murder.
Thanks, Monique. And what gets the men's attention is the sex strike. The women go on strike and offer no sex.
Yeah.
And I think it might be one of the lead characters who says, it might have been the Prime Minister says that more sex is needed, not less. So
yes, that's what
the way to actually capture a man's attention is to deny them the thing that will give them most pleasure, allegedly.
Say that again?
The way to capture the attention of this
men,
patriarchal
is to love
society.
them more and sex them more and not deny them sex,
But also they're denying themselves sex as well, aren't they? This is kind of an absolution.
Yeah. Well, it's worked. It's one of the many things. I think I wanted to throw every type of resistance into the mix.
Yeah.
So it's not just they sex strike. They do other things. The pan players come on board. The sex workers come on board. They try all kinds of things. They try lying down on the road. They try like a die-in. They're constantly reinventing what they're going to do. They tie themselves up. They lash themselves to railings. They march. They use spirituality as well. So the whole square is like mainlining Kali and Lakshmi and Guabanse and, goddesses from the islands and from various religions as a kind of spiritual backup. But the sex strike is part of it. And yes, the women are denying sex themselves, but also this is a tactic that has worked in other countries, and it's one of the tactics they use.
Thank you for that. So we're going to turn to Sophia now. Sophia, How to Say Babylon. You're going to read from How to Say Babylon?
Yes.
And which passage would you read from?
I'm going to read...
I should explain that also, before you begin, this is a memoir. It took a fair number of years to write, and it charts your passage with your family and your rather overbearing, dominant father.
Yes, it is a memoir, so it's not fiction. It's true. Mm-hmm. I'm going to read a passage here that is, I think, one of the defining moments in the book and also in my life, when I decided to cut my dreadlocks. And I think a lot of people, when they think of dreadlocks, they might think it's just a hairstyle. But for the Rastafari, it's much more than that. It holds so much more weight. Mm-hmm. For the Rastafari, it's a sacred marker of your devotion to Rastafari. It's a symbol of your purity and the depth of your reverence to Jah. Of course, it was the Godhead figure of the Rastafari movement. But over time, as I got older, when I was a teenager, I just began to feel that my dreadlocks not only was something that I was ostracized for by my teachers, by my peers at school, but it just began to feel like it represented my own loss of autonomy, my loss of my voice, and a sort of loss of control over my own future. And instead tethered me to my father and his idea of what kind of woman I should be, and his notion of what my future should be. And I wanted to decide for myself my own future, be the author of my own sense of womanhood. And so, this passage describes this moment where I say to my mother, Mom, I just don't think I can live like this anymore. I don't feel like I'm myself. And she said to me simply, tell me how I can help. Mom told me to hold down my head, and I held down my head. She asked me if I was ready, and I said yes. Beside me, the sea breeze made womanly shapes in the lace of my curtain, and no one among us spoke. I don't know who held the scissors or who made the first cut. All I heard were the hinges of the shears locking and unlocking, the blades cutting, and then long black reeds of hair came loose in their quick hands. My dreadlocks fell around me like ruined limbs. I closed my eyes then because I could not look at what I was losing. I had railed for so long and I had not expected it to matter when the moment came. But now I found that it mattered a great deal. My throat burned with peculiar remorse as all my dreadlocks fell away. For what was Medusa without her snakes? There was hair, so much hair. Dead hair, hair of my gone self, wisps of spiderweb hair, old uniform lint hair, pillow sponge and tangerine strings hair. A whole life pulled itself up by my hair, the hair that locked the year I broke my tooth, hair that locked the day we caught cane ashes in the yard. Hair of our lean years, hair of the fat, pollen of marigold's hair, my mother's aloe vera hair, my sister's weaving wild ixoras in my hair, the pull of the tides at our sea village hair, grits of sand hair, hair of salt tears, hair thick with the blood of my own cut wrists. Hair of my binding, hair of my unbeautiful wanting, hair of his bitter words, hair of the cruel world, hair roping me to my father's belt, hair wrestling the taunts of bald heads in the street, hair of my lone self, hair wrapped atop the ghost woman in white's hair, red thread of hair, centuries of hair, galloping future of incorrigible hair, all cut away from me. When they were finished, my neck and head were so light they swung unsteady. The tethers had been cut from me, and I was new again, unburdened. Someone different, I told myself. A girl who could choose what happened next.
It's a really powerful and poignant tale, and I was with you there, and you're getting your hair cut off. How did it go down with your father?
He was angry. He was furious, and he didn't talk to me for a year. We lived in the same house, and he looked through me like I was a ghost. I think at that point I had become Babylon to him.
What's interesting about the book, I think, well, there's so many things that are interesting, is about your capacity for forgiveness. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, or chastise me if I'm wrong, but your father was a bit of a monster in terms of the way that he imposed his will on everybody in that family unit.
Oh, I'm going to chastise you.
Good.
Only because that's not the word I would use.
Okay. What word would you use?
I think he took things to the extreme. I think he was overprotective. I think he became very fearful of this idea of Babylon as a corruptive influence. And I think he just went about it the wrong way. I think his fear of wanting to protect us became this sort of darkened paranoia that manifested in ways that weren't good. But in writing the book, no one was more surprised than me that I was forgiving. because I would never describe myself before writing this book as a forgiving person. But in writing the book and writing about growing up Rastafari, there was no way to tell my story of Rastafari without telling my connection to Rastafari, which is directly through my father. And so there was no way to tell his story of coming to Rastafari without actually asking him. And when we were growing up, you know, there was so much he never told us. It was almost like the rule of law came down and he just said, don't ask me why, just do what I say. And it was really in writing the book that I had to humanize him because I needed to understand him. He had never really humanized himself to us. He wanted to be this sort of Godhead figure. And so in writing the book, I found myself making these paths to forgiveness because I needed to understand. And I did not want to portray him as just purely villainous, because I don't think any human being is that one thing, right?
No,
I had to think about the nuances of who he was and how he came to be this way, and how when he chose to be a Rasta at 16, his own family kicked him out. On the street, he was homeless. And I had to do all these recorded interviews with him to talk about his youth and talk about his path to Rastafari. And it was in doing these interviews and talking with him and trying to sort of really weave our story that I came to this path of forgiveness and understanding.
And that compassion arises actually in the telling of his story early on, where, as you say, he's beginning to adopt Rastafari. There's a moment when the family are going to move from one house to another, and he's helping pack up the vans and the car. It's taken a long time. And then when he gets to go into the car, his mother says, no, there's no room for you. And he thinks, what, no room in the car? No room for you in the new house.
Yeah.
Cruel.
Very cruel, and really he was 16 years old, and because he'd, just turned to Rastafari at that time, his mother and her husband said, we don't want any Rastas in our house. And it really surprised me when I was talking to my father about this moment. And that chapter where I write about his youth and my mother's youth, I recorded many interviews with them. And really, most of it, as you read in the book, is transcribed almost directly as they said it to me. And when my father was recounting this moment of being kicked out and being homeless because he was Rastafari, his voice broke and he wept. And that was one of the first times I ever heard my father weep. And it really struck me that this was a wound he was still carrying so deeply. And how could I not have that reflected in how I crafted the book?
Thank you very much, Sophia. We're going to come back to you. In a little while, we're going to read a poem in a little while, but we're going to turn now to Kevin. And this notion of the sins of the father visited on the children crops up in your book as well, doesn't it, Kevin? So
yes.
What passage are you going to read?
I'm actually going to read from the introduction, like bits from the introduction. So I'm actually going to read the epigraph first, and I would like everyone to keep in mind the epigraph. It's from the Mahabharata. And the epigraph says, without doubt, all kings, O son, must once behold hell. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that to become a king, you have to go through hell. That's not what the passage means. It means that you must be able to look at your subjects and be able to tell that they are going through hell. That's the only way that you can become a king. Some politicians could probably ascribe to that. But something I want everyone to keep in mind with this. Also, I want to give a warning. Before, Colin told me that this book was a bit disturbing to him. So if it was disturbing to him, hopefully it's not too disturbing for you.
I'm very prudish, I should say.
The boy was an only child, frail but uncommonly precocious, large, intelligent eyes, his nose deep in old, crumpled magazines, the frown of an old holy man in these troubling times, skin so fair that the elders had said it was touched by the goddess Radha. He once had hair like a wild child, a haven of lice. Never wanted it combed, ruffled it, and teased it back out if anyone did. This boy's name was Krishna Sarup. Krishna was from a family of three. The three lived in a sugarcane estate barrack. These barracks were scattered like half-buried bones across the plain strewn from their colonial corpse. In the marrow, the ghosts of the indentured and the offspring of those ghosts. This particular barrack sat on its lonesome, raw and jagged as a yanked tooth in the paragrass-spangled stretch of meadow, beyond the cane field, beyond the rice paddies, the village proper and the sugar mill, in a corner where God had to squint to see. Neighbor to nothing, one donkey cart ride away from the closest dry goods store. This is a place of lesser lives. A tangle of wood and iron that seemed to slightly shift shape every time a strong wind galloped over it. There was a communal yard for cooking and drinking and fighting, and inside lived 5 families, and there were 5 rooms, 10 by 10 feet, and between each room were cracked wooden partitions that did not go all the way up. The cold earthen ground, clothes stitched from old flour bags, coconut fiber mattresses permanently depressed, topped with pillows stuffed with sugarcane tassels. The macadam road here had no names. They were only distinguished by the frequency of their fractures. Here, the snake's calls blurred with the primeval hiss of wind through the plants. Picture in plein air, all shades of green, soaked with vermilion and red and purple and ochre. And picture what the good people call fever grass, wild coralie, shining bush, timaries, teco marias, bragri, barcano, Christophine, chenet, moko, moringa, pomerac, pomsite, barbidine, barha. Picture it, humanity as ants on the savannah. Picture curry leaves springing into helices, mangroves cross-legged in the decanted swamp, bastions of sugarcane bowing and sprawled, even and remote, and the spoiled smell of sulfate of ammonia somewhere in there. Pink hearts of caladium that beat and bounce between burnt statures of bird cucumber. Picture it, all laying like tufts and bristles and pelagies upon the back of some buried colossus. The Churchill-Roosevelt Highway sliced that colossus in half. On one side, the belief of bush and burlap and sohari and jute and rattan and thatch and tapia. And on the other side was Bell Village, the dogma of a new world. In this era, howling and preaching steel and diesel and rayon and vinyl and gypsum and triple glazed glass. Trinidad had been killed, and now it was to be resurrected. In Bell Village, the Presbyterian Church stood broad as a gunslinger in a silent face-off with the temple's kaleidoscope of jandy flags. An evangelic takeover of Christianity. Every week, one fewer bamboo pole and one more shilling on the offering plate, brass stained with the blood of Christ. The crucifix and the steeple so dappled in bird shit that they had merged with the mortar. The shadow of the sugar mill black like molasses, chipped mill houses like rubble, tall, domed, and phallic. The love children of industrialists and missionaries, England, Canada, Cornwall, Holland, wherever, you made sure to call them Sir. Though most of them knew that their time was almost up by now, there were elephants marching to the graveyard. The schoolhouse was modeled after the church. Krishna was the only child in the barrack enrolled there. He despised it. They cut his hair. His classmates were all from Bell Village. He despised them all. Some were Hindu at home, but had to be Presbyterian at school. Not him. One cannot be both is what he taught. You must choose one. Only a fool would spread his soul thin. For Christmas, the missionaries and their wives brought gifts. To the boy on the right, a toy locomotive. The girl on the left, a little traveler's sewing kit. He got a chewed pencil and a Bible, which found good use as wrapping paper for fish. The teachers wore thick jackets in the hot sun and seemed to become aroused when they put their whips to use. Each one ascribed a biblical moniker, Gomorrah, Rapture, Revelations. A few children were whipped harder than the others. Krishna among them. Krishna did not know what elegy written in a country churchyard had to do with him, yet he knew the first 3 stanzas by heart. He had no friends at school. He was the oldest in his class. A small group of his classmates turned the others against him, and when he gave the girls lice. He was pestered incessantly, the taunting, maddening. They spread the word that he still lived in a barrack because his grandpa loved rum more than his children, because nobody in his family could spell their own names, because none of them could add without using their fingers. They told the class that Krishna drank the same pond water that the goats squatted in, that spiders nested in his food and cockroaches crawled into his nose at night, that he stank of his father's semen, because his father would take his mother in front of him, and that he daydreamed of joining in. It was hard for Krishna to hear these things, because some of them were true. After school one evening, those same boys from his class kicked him down, took turns spitting on his head. It hadn't been the first time, but this time he would not stand for it. He had the bold blood of his companions running through him. Something had gotten into him since then, the promise of a blood oath. The twins that he made friends with, his cousin Tarak. He pictured himself as a scorned bird, the kobo. Enough was enough. And later that evening, while those classmates bathed in the river, he and his companions put dog shit in their shoes. And things escalated from there. They hurled rocks at each other. They skirmished, fists to cheeks, hands to throats, fought like they had been rivals since the beginning of time itself. Krishna enlisted his cousin Tarak to get revenge. A tall boy, made him taller as he kept his long hair bundled high and bristly like a pineapple. He had a distinct way of twitching his shoulders like a hound, trying to shake fleas off. And Krishna was 1 year younger, but Tarak admired him like he was an elder sibling. They spiked the bullies' water with glauber sauce, exploded their bowels, and they put scorpions in the latrine. Inevitably, someone got stung. Anaphylactic shock. Tarak was willing to take the fall, but Krishna wanted them to know it was me who did it. The poor boy could have died, was all the Sahib schoolmasters said to Krishna after being told of the bullying. His father had to get on his knees and beg and kiss the schoolmaster's feet. Krishna was suspended for the rest of the year. Krishna's mother, after hearing the news, crafted a mala from exora flowers, lit a wick in a diya and circled it over her son 3 times while chanting a holy mantra. Made him wear an Aranjanam string around his waist for a week in case the boy's mother's paid a demon to put a curse on him. Krishna ate dinner by flambeau light, trying to bat away the mosquitoes. After sunset, his mother put out the flambeau. The plains were so dark now that he could barely see his own hands. The egrets flew overhead. When the toads quieted, the world outside vanished. There was nothing left to do now but sleep. As he drifted off, he reminded himself, Krishna, don't let the dreams fool you. This is your place in this world. And there's no other world out there but this one. There's no other body than the one the gods have paired you with. And there's no other life but the one to which you are bound. Thank you.
There's a lot of, thank you, Kevin. There's a lot of violence in the book, isn't there? Both emotional and physical. And I'm just wondering where that comes from. I remember my mum, who's Jamaican, talked about the fact, because this book is set in the 40s, right? She said about the violence, then it was knife, now it's gun. But the sentiment remains the same, doesn't it?
Yes.
And I'm just wondering what that kind of anger comes from. There's a line in the book that says about the Trinidadian man, nothing exhilarating about the Trinidadian male, the barnacle upon the bow of a retired schooner. And that kind of sense of anger and frustration comes right the way through. Is that one of the kind of key themes, you think, of your book?
Yes, it is. And in this case, I was talking about the subsets of the male that were there, sort of disposable and forgotten, like left in the shadow. And as we go deeper into the book, we see backstories of some of these characters. And there's a challenge that I set for myself with this, is that I did not, although you're seeing a rivalry in the book, there's really no, I didn't want to villainize. So the villain itself is the colonization of the country. There's no, and the systems that have been set up at the time for these people in the barrack, that I say is like they're hungry ghosts. And some of us in Trinidad, we're still like that. We want things that we simply cannot have. You cannot get it, but you see it on TV. You see it on social media. You see it on TikTok. You want this. It's not real. It doesn't exist. There's a question before about paradise. Paradise does not exist. Toss me into that big black echo, because with paradise, it is always built onto the backs of others. And that's what this book is about.
Thank you. Thank you. Monique, is it easier to write about sex than to write about violence? And what joy did you get from writing about sex in your book?
I don't think I did write a lot of sex in my book, compared to the sex I've written in other books. I have in my small oeuvre written two sex books, and this isn't. I don't think I've written a little bit of sex, but not a lot. I've written what I would call funny feminist sex a bit. Yeah.
What does it serve? How does it serve the book? The sex in the book.
How does it serve the book?
Yes. That's a reasonable question, isn't it?
So the sex strike serves the strike.
Yeah.
And obviously my characters are impacted by the sex strike. So I couldn't help myself write a couple of sex scenes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's part of character development and all of that. I mean, people have, in fact, I think they're both with Loveday, but, yeah.
So Loveday is the policeman responsible
corrupt
for
cop,
discovering or finding who is the man responsible for killing the Japanese woman, isn't he? But he's a corrupt policeman.
But I mean, you have to think about cops in literature, in crime novels, and then cops in the Caribbean and in Trinidad, and, there's no such thing as a good cop. So he being corrupt comes with his archetypal status. And actually, his corruption's quite low level, apart from the fact that he's covering up a big secret. He's been blackmailed by his brother. So I always think of Loveday as somebody who's only mildly corrupt. He's just taking anything that's put under his nose. I mean, who wouldn't help themselves to a little bit of, this or that? So, where are we going with this? The sex. So I don't think it's a very sexy book. I think it's a book about violence perpetrated against women in a way that has got to the stage where something needs to be done. Trinidad is a violent place. When you see those murder, lists, somebody puts out a list every year of the countries in the world where there are the most murders. And Trinidad is always like number 6 or number 3, it's always...
Over Jamaica?
Huh?
Jamaica?
Yeah,
Trinidad?
Jamaica,
More than
Trinidad.
Jamaica?
It's always you or us or... So, and then at the same time, we live in this violence, and lots of people are murdered, and in the 500 a year, which is, by the way, how many people are murdered in this country a year. And 97% of these people are caught. People who murder people here get caught. In Trinidad, same number, 2% get caught, kind of thing. But there is a small group inside our murder statistic of about 50 women who get killed every year. And they aren't killed in the same way. They're femicided. It's a different type of violence. They are killed in the home. They're killed by people they know. Sometimes it's gang-related, sometimes it's not. But it's, they say evil is banal. It's a banal... we do hear about these women who get murdered, but quite a few of them we don't. And so I'm interested in how our femicides are glossed inside a very big statistic, and the women aren't counted. And this book is about counting these women, calling names, talking about what femicide looks like, which at one point I found something in the newspaper and I've adapted it, but women, I hate this word, domestic violence, makes it sound like women are washing machines or something, or microwaves or something. Whereas this list that came out of a local newspaper, it was like so-and-so burnt alive, buried in a ditch, so-and-so chopped up, found dead in the thing, somebody else in a ravine, somebody else only the femur. It's like horrendous violence happening. These women are being killed and left in a fridge or a ditch or being chopped and burnt and buried alive and all these, and shot and everything. And with fiction, you can ask the reader to get to know some of these women and maybe care if one of them goes missing.
Yeah.
Because these women are being killed all over the world, not just in a small Caribbean country. And we just switch off.
Yeah.
And recently in this country, a man, killed 3 women with a shot bow. In this country, as you probably heard in July, a mother and her 2 daughters with a shot bow, you know, like a bow and arrow, a hydraulic bow and arrow.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's horrendous, but we just switch it off. We just scroll past it, you know? And then this Olympic athlete was burnt alive by her partner. And you could just scroll past that. It's terrible.
But what's great about
blah,
it is
blah.
that
I don't want to, I don't understand. And I think this is why I wanted to step over the sacred cow of race and say, you know what? Something is keeping this problem from women getting our shit together, of getting us all in the room, because this is something that happens to all women. It's not, you know, it's everyone knows about domestic violence. Everybody's touched by this. Everybody's experienced a whiff of violence, at the very least, at the hands of men. Anyway, my book is about violence perpetrated against women and women fighting back.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks. So we're going to end with Sophia's going to read a poem and show you how experienced and professional I am. I'm going to call it Planet Dread.
Oh, you're going to call it that. I thought I called it that.
Oh, I see. It is called Planet. I'm just checking that I got the title right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, when I saw the poets earlier, I was like jealous because I want to have some fun with the poets too. You know, I'm sitting here at the fiction writers and y'all are fun, but I want to remind everyone that I'm a poet. And actually, I find it to be a compliment when people say, oh, your prose is so poetic. Thank you. Thank you very much. It should be.
Poets make the best fiction and non-fiction fiction writers, I think.
I'm biased, but I agree. So I'm going to read a new poem, and it's the titular poem of my next collection, and I'm really thinking about, earlier we were talking about dialects and about the Caribbean voice, the Jamaican voice, and I'm thinking particularly about Rastafari dialect and Rasta vernacular, which is separate from Jamaican patois.
Irie.
Anyways, so for example, you know, for the Rastafari, the way that they speak in this particular dialect is, it comes from an anti-colonial place. It comes from a place of wanting to disrupt the English language, of turning and twisting everything, particularly as a transgressive act. And so, you know, for example, Rasta Brethren, like my father, they don't say understand, they say overstand. He doesn't say appreciate, he says appreciate love. My father takes it even further. He doesn't say continually, he says itinually. And so he changes all the words like this. And similarly, they don't say me, they say I and I, or I man. And the idea is that the Rasta it's a collective spirit, not an individual one, that Jah is always with the Rasta brethren. And then I was thinking about this I man, right? I man. And when I was writing the book, the memoir, I asked my brother, hey, Lidge, so tell me what it means to you when you say I man. And he said something so wonderfully, like philosophically. He said, oh, it's me asserting myself and my existence to the universe when I say I man. And I said, okay, well, what if I want to like assert myself to the universe? What do I say? And he said, oh, you know, sis, I never thought of that before. And I said, okay, can I say I woman? He said, oh, you know, that sounds funny. That sounds but the last chapter in the book is called I Woman.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking of this poem and the collection as an extension of that, of thinking about the linguistic rebellion of Rastafari, but infusing a kind of femininity inside of it in the language. So this is the poem, and I'm gonna stand like Lawrence because poetry, like Lorca said, needs to move from the root of your foot to the top of your head. This is Planet Dread. Dread not I. Dread from the sea I was drawn, I blue as dread, tender dread, taloned as our future dread. Dread the constellation I was born under, dread I slept under, dread the waves of history blustering red. Dread my mother's calm, dread the harpy's song. Dread she nursed me, dread she named me, dread my girlhood under sugarcane, dread the hurricane. I was a child of dread, a psalm of dread, dread pressed into my palm like the blessed herb, a divine dread, Rastaman said. Before I could speak, there was dread. Before I could stumble, dread roamed the shore, a ghostly spume, dreadless thread of the woman I'm erasing, dread my one coastline crumbling to sea rise to abyss. Dread my dead tooth on making the veil, dread the ointment I dread, the wound I dread, the whale I dread, the jonquil's eye, smoke of black clouds heralding only dread. Skirmish of youth, my constant banner of dread, dread at the home, dread to the bone, my father dangling his guillotine of dread. Dread as daily bread, nursed dark by decades of dread, teachers recoiled at my knotted thorns of dread. How the white girls blanched with dread. Beware my black heart of dread, scorned for the hair on my head. The reckless haunt of my dread, girl born of nothing but salt air and dread. Girl who bore nothing but a vision of dread, such a savage dread, thrum of the natty dread, Congo bongo dread. Martyred was the dread, brother still the dread, blood of my dread, Babylon maiming families of dread, pastors railing against our dread, dread the crown of heavens I wear upon this head, dread at the root, dread of the fruit, sister of the dread, daughter of the dread, first woman giving birth to her dread, a gorgon stoning every bald head, dead.
Well, if it's not inappropriate, I think that was pretty dread. But anyway, we're going to have 5 minutes, just 5 minutes for questions, and then we're not going to have 5 minutes for questions. We're going to listen to what we just heard and reflect on what we just heard and think about the fact that all that we've heard tonight is available for you to take with you home when you buy a book. Because writing is an act of arrogance. Who wants to read your bloody thing anyway? But it's also an act of humility, an invitation to share a world created by these wonderful writers. So do yourself a favor and buy a book. So finally, can we put our hands together for Monique Roffey? Sophia Sinclair. And Kevin Gerard Hussein. So, and my thanks to Bocas, this equally good literary festival in the Caribbean, equally as good as Calabash, I should say. I should say, but then I'm an associate Jamaican, so what do I know? So, and I hope that the British Library in their wisdom invites Bocas back. I think you've all had a wonderful time. Thank you.